Hey guys, Edre here. Today I'm going to be reviewing the brand new AC/DC album, Power Up. You heard that right. The new AC/DC album, Power Up. Now, like I do with all my reviews, I start with a bit of background. But before I really get into even that, why am I reviewing a new AC/DC album? I haven't reviewed many classic rock artists who have put out albums this year, such as Deep Purple or Blue Oyster Cult. They put out albums this year. Mainly because I feel that in many ways these artists, these groups, are simply just out of their prime. I think it is unfair to give Deep Purple or Blue Oyster Cult or those type of artists the same critique that you would give them 40, 50 years ago. So I was hesitant to cover this new AC/DC album, but I felt that this album was worth covering. Mainly because it was unexpected to me. I honestly thought that they were going to be broken up or that they were going to eventually break up soon, considering a few years back, Brian Johnson did depart from the band due to hearing loss. Malcolm Young died. And overall, the band just seemed in shambles, and I was not expecting to hear new music. And yet here we are. But like I said, I do like going into a bit of background on my thoughts on these artists. So what are my overall thoughts on AC/DC? Well, when you go back to the 70s with Bon Scott as the frontman, I genuinely think AC/DC was one of the pioneering bands in the hard rock scene. I feel like, well, they did have a pretty standard sound. They also had a lot of blues influence in there, a lot of blues rock. They experiment a little more with different types of riffs, different types of songs, some satirical material as well. And I do overall think that the album Highway to Hell is a really solid album. And I think, as we all know, Bon Scott died, and by the early 80s, Brian Johnson had replaced him. And the first album with Brian Johnson, Back in Black, is a solid album. It's a solid classic hard rock album with a pretty strong track list, some excellent hit singles on there. But it's everything after Back in Black in which the band almost completely loses me. Back in Black came out 40 years ago, and yet their sound has not changed at all. Every album since has essentially just been the same formula repeated over and over and over again, with the same drum beat, the same style of riffs, the same style of singing. And overall, the band just failed to progress past that point. And Brian Johnson's vocals got even more screechy, more guttural as the years went on. And while in theory that would be a good thing, when the music doesn't change, but the voice does, it doesn't add up. And what you end up getting is 40 years worth of bland albums that are not memorable, with the occasional hit single on there every now and then. And so going into this album, I kind of knew what I was going to get. At least I was expecting what I was going to get. Something that I have heard before. And that is exactly what I got. Now, like I said, I felt a little hesitant even covering this album because AC/DC is a much older band than a lot of the other artists I've reviewed on this channel that have put out new albums. And at the end of the day, I kind of knew what I was getting into, so why would I go out of my way to review it? Well, like I said, this was an unexpected release for me. I wasn't expecting it. It was a surprise. That's why I'm covering it. Well, let's just start off with the sound of this record. It is a continuation of the same exact style and sound they've been going with for 40 years, without a doubt. And to me, it comes across as some of the most bland, hard, classic rock out there. With the most it's like if you boil it down to its simplest form, this is what you get. And this is, as an album, Power Up could have been recorded 30 years ago, and you could have convinced me that it was recorded 30 years ago, because it sounds like something that could have been released 30 years ago. And, well, for some bands, that's a good thing. It means they still have that revitalized youth. For AC/DC, that's kind of a bad thing, because it means that they haven't evolved at all over the past 30 to 40 years. Production-wise, I was left feeling that this is a very averagely produced rock album. There's nothing flashy or interesting that really caught my attention with the production on here. It's nothing out of the ordinary that I wouldn't expect from an old hard rock band. And it's hard for me to go into each and every track here because so many of the tracks just all blend together in this big mush of AC/DC sounds that, you know, you kind of can predict the minute you press play. And there isn't even that many songs that honestly stick out on this thing. You know, the song Shot in the Dark was the lead single from this album. And even though it was the lead single, and obviously the song most people are familiar with going into this album, it doesn't provide you with anything that all the other tracks don't already provide you with. A driving rhythm, a chunky riff, some, you know, signature scratchy vocals. It's everything you want in an AC/DC song. Nothing else that the rest of the album doesn't provide. And there is a bit of variation, I will admit, on this album by AC/DC standards. You know, songs like Through the Mists of Time really do kind of slow it down a bit for AC/DC. I do appreciate the fact that they do go out of their way to add at least a few little slower songs here and there. And they also do tap into some of their hard rock blues roots on tracks like Systems Down. But that doesn't last long before they morph a song like that into the homogenized sound of AC/DC that we've all come to know and expect. At the end of the day, none of the tracks here really are, like, groundbreaking. None of them are, like, the greatest things they've ever done. None of them leave that massive of an impact. And, well, a lot of people watching this might think it is quite harsh of me to be saying this, considering they are such an old band. The reason why I feel like it is a bit justified is because this is like their 17th or something album. And yet it still sounds exactly the same. I don't know really what else to say here. Usually I try to make my reviews a bit longer, but there really is not much to say here. This is what you expect from AC/DC in 2020. Exactly what you would have expected in 1990 or 2000 or 1985. AC/DC as a band has failed to move forward, and I'm sure this album will please AC/DC's hardcore fans, and I'm sure a lot of the hardcore fans will watch this video and smash the dislike button, which I will look forward to. But I'm sorry, it failed to leave any impact on me, and it's just painful to hear a band that once in the 70s was one of the most influential, most powerful hard rock bands out there, just with every release since then, morph into this stereotypical, very bland shell of their former selves. With all that being said, I have settled on giving AC/DC Power Up a decent 3 out of 10. Now, a 3 out of 10 is not a positive review. Anything below a 5 is negative. Anything above a 5 is positive. So a 3 is a negative. Now, the reason it's not lower than a 3 is because it lived up to my expectations. I mean, it is what it is. It is an AC/DC album. It's kind of what you expect. But the reason it doesn't rank higher than a 3 is because even though it's what I expected, it doesn't make it any less disappointing. That being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this. If you didn't, smash the dislike button. If you did, whatever. That's it for now. AC/DC Power Up. Decent 3 out of 10. What can I say?